Hello adults, welcome to the second video in our Lenten video series of the study of some of the stories of the book of Genesis. Could that have been any more complicated of a sentence, complex of a sentence? Today we're going to talk about the call of Abraham. Actually the call of Abraham and Sarah, but Abraham is the primary character in the story. Again, just to remind you, we're taking our lessons basically from this book, Genesis from scratch. Well, not basically, we are taking it. I mean, it's a fantastic resource. As I told you last time, one of the authors, Dr. Eugene March here, was one of my professors in seminary, fantastic professor. So he's so much smarter than I am. So why reinvent the wheel? Let's just go with the stuff that Dr. March gives us, and it really will provide some good fodder. Now, the lessons that we're doing out of this book do not cover the entire chapters of these book. Last week, when we talked about the creation stories, we just talked about one of the creation stories, but there is quite a bit more in the chapter than that. There is also talk about the first creation story. We only dealt with the second creation story. There's also some discussion about the flood in that first chapter. Today, we're going to be talking about Abraham and Sarah, and primarily the call that God gave them and how they moved from their land in Ur to the land of Canaan, where God had called them. But there's a lot more in this chapter to be dealing with. I would highly recommend this book. It is fantastic. It's an easy read. It's a short enough read. Genesis from Scratch by Donald L. Griggs and Dr. Eugene March. Get on Amazon, buy it. Fantastic resource. We're only going to be covering a little bit of it, but if you're enjoying the content, then I recommend you getting the book. So the call of Abraham and Sarah after the creation, kind of some of the next stories that are in the book of Genesis concern Abraham. In fact, quite a bit of the book of Genesis concerns Abraham and Abraham's offspring, but there's an entire section, we call it the Abraham Epic, or the Abraham Saga. There's various names for it. I can't remember what some of the real biblical scholars call it right now. The real biblical scholars call it right now. But there's a whole section of chapters that just deals with Abraham and Abraham's family and what it meant for God to call these people out of the place where they were and start to develop the covenant with them, the covenant that God develops with all of us. It started right here with Abraham and Sarah. So Abraham and Sarah were from a country called Ur. Now the best of our knowledge, here's where Ur is. It is located in what is now modern day Iraq. So we are very familiar with this area of the world. Ur was about 200 miles southeast of Baghdad, about 100 miles northwest of the border with Kuwait on the banks of the Euphrates River. So Abraham and Sarah lived there with Abraham's father and with all of Abraham's extended family, as we learn in the latter parts of Genesis chapter 11. They were Mesopotamians. They were not Israelites. This is important. God didn't just make Israelites out of nothing. God does do that. Remember, we talked about that last week. God makes things out of the dust of the earth. But at this point now, God is calling a specific group of people from a specific place, calling them out of their place, so to speak, and telling them, I need you to go this way. So, it is interesting to me. I mean, that's one of the very first things that I love about the stories of Abraham, and just the idea, the reality of Abraham, is that God chose a particular group of people to do a particular thing. And the particular thing that God chose this group of people to do is a pretty remarkable thing. Now, even though the family was from Ur, when God called to Abraham, they were in a city called Haran. Now, we don't know why the family left Ur and headed to Haran. Haran is a city that is located in what is right now, I think it's southeast Turkey. We don't know why they were there, but that's where they were. And that is where the call from God to Abraham came, was when they were there in Haran. Now, we don't know much about this call. We don't know how God heard, or how Abraham heard God's voice. Was it an audible voice? Was it something? We don't know any of those things. And we have to ask ourselves, was this a literal encounter that Abraham had with God, or was it more likely a literary device that the author of Genesis is using to get across a point? We're not going to know for certain, but I want to suggest that it's probably more of a literary device. And here's what I think, and this is what Griggs and March say in Genesis from Scratch, and I agree with them, that the point is that God is calling people. God is initiating a relationship with a certain group of people, choosing those people, establishing a relationship with those people, and working through those people. I think that's probably a much more faithful rendition and interpretation and understanding of the Bible than just, Abraham heard a voice. Abraham heard a voice. In the Bible, what we often see is that the biblical writers have a point to get across. They've got something that they want to say. They're not writing dispassionate histories here. They're trying to make a point. I know that, when we talk about this in worship, a lot of times we talk about Acts, the book of Acts and the book of Luke. Luke wrote both Acts and the Gospel of Luke. And in that instance, the Gospel writer is very clear what he's up to. Remember, he says right at the beginning of those two books, "Hey, Theophilus," he's writing for this person whose name is Theophilus, "I've read everything else about Jesus, and I'm wanting to write down these stories now because I've got a particular point that I want to make to you." I mean, that's basically what Luke says in the beginning of Luke and the beginning of Acts. Luke is the only biblical writer that's just honest about it. But all the biblical stories, all the books of the Bible, they're trying to make a point. And what Griggs and March say, and what I agree with, is that what this story is trying to tell us is that God decides to initiate relationship with people. This is something that we as Reformed Christians, we talk about it all the time, right? We don't choose God, God chooses us. It starts right here. It starts right here. God has chosen this one family, Abraham from Ur, who's now living in Haran. Hey, I'm choosing you. And it's a very interesting thing that God says to Abraham. I want you to go over here. There's going to be a place that I'm going to show you. I want you to go over there. And honestly, that's all that God says to Abraham. That's a lot of trust. That's a lot of faith. I like to think that I would have that kind of faith in God. I don't know. But it's very interesting to me that Abraham, with little more than that, says, okay. So he packs up, and he and his nephew Lot, whom we know a lot of stories about. Remember Lot's wife, pillar to salt. He and his nephew Lot and his wife Sarah, they pack up everything they have, and they head out. They head out towards the land of Canaan. And the whole purpose for going to Canaan is very simple. Very simple. God wants to start establishing a people. God wants to establish a people, and this is where we have what we refer to, whenever we talk about the covenant, this is where the covenant comes. This is where the covenant starts. God calls and creates these people, us people, but these people that we're reading about in Genesis, particularly Abraham and Sarah, and all of Abraham and Sarah's family, God establishes a covenant with them. And what God says to them is, you're going to have a lot of kids here. I'm going to make an entire nation out of you. Come away from the nation that you are living in. Come away from the family, the tribe, the people that you are a part of. Go over here, and I'm going to make a nation out of you. And I'm going to make you a great nation. And your name is going to be blessed. And here's the important piece. Because of you, all people on earth are going to be blessed. Because of you. I'm going to bless you, and because of you, all the people on earth are going to be blessed. So this is the essence of the covenant. God says, I'm choosing you, I'm blessing you, and because I bless you, everyone will be blessed. Do you see the pattern there? God chooses, God blesses, and then we take that blessing out, and we take that blessing out into the world. At its very core, the whole point of the calling of God on the people of God is to bless the entire world. That's the thing that I want us to get more than anything about this call of Abraham. I mean, there are a lot of stories about Abraham and Sarah in this Bible that reveal to us that there's no reason why they should be called, and that they should be blessed, and that they should be used to bless the whole world. When they were traveling through Egypt, Abraham told Sarah to pretend like she was his sister. He was worried that if he showed up with this hot wife, because I mean that's basically what the text says. Hey, you're hot, and I don't want the Pharaoh to kill me and take you. So he was worried that if he showed up with this hot wife, they were going to kill him. So he said, lie and tell them that you are my sister. So the Pharaoh took Sarah and was going to bring them in, and it was revealed that Sarah was not the sister, but actually the wife. And so the Pharaoh said, just get out of here. At several other points, Abraham chooses a servant to be his heir. God had already said, I'm going to make a great nation out of you. You're going to have children. But Abraham didn't believe that. And so he chose a servant to be his heir. Sarah did the same thing. Remember, she brought Hagar to Abraham and said, have a child with my maidservant. The result of that was Ishmael, the father of the Muslim nations. But Abraham and Sarah both did these things. This is the amazing thing to me about God, and here's the way that Griggs and March say it. Abraham and Sarah were not selected because they were especially virtuous or brave or faithful. They were average people with good traits and bad. God chooses people that have good traits and bad traits. I often like to say, remember, you've heard me say this in worship, those of us who are not worthy of Christ's grace and peace, not only do we receive Christ's grace and peace, but we get charged with spreading Christ's grace and peace. So this is the story, this is the thing that we learn from the story of Abraham and Sarah. God has chosen us. Regardless of our abilities, regardless of our faithfulness, regardless of how good we are, God chooses us. So deal with it. You've been chosen by God. There's something that God has for you to do. And don't screw it up like Abraham and Sarah. Don't try to take this into your own hands. Now don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that you're not responsible for your own actions. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that you shouldn't, plan well, plan the work the plan. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that. What I'm saying is that ultimately this thing is decided by God, and we need to act like it. And so probably more than sitting down and writing out a list of pros and a list of cons when we come up with a decision that we make, we probably need to enter a little more into prayer than we normally do. We need to learn the art of discernment. We need to understand that following God is not a clear-cut thing. Abraham was told, go that way, right? Go that way. I got a place for you. Didn't give him any address, just said, go that way, and there's going to be a place for you. And Abraham responded. Are you and I willing to do that? Are we willing to answer the call from God when all God says is go that way? Are we willing to follow God and to rely upon God when God doesn't give us much more than go that way? Even though we know that the point of our existence is to be a blessing to the world in which we live, are we willing to walk that way? I think that's another thing that Lent is all about. Are we willing to walk by faith and not by sight? Are we willing to respond to that? I like to tell folks, that pull in your gut. When you hear something or think something or something comes into your frame of reference, or when you hear that this thing may need to happen or something and your chest starts to constrict, I like to tell people giving into that is faith. Giving into that is faith. I can just tell you personally, when I first heard the word seminary, my chest started to constrict. I couldn't breathe, and I knew there was something there for me. There was something that I needed to explore. I was scared to death. I was scared to death to even think about going to seminary. But giving into that was an example, at least in my life, of how I understand faith. Are we willing to do that? And I'm ashamed to say I don't respond to that. I don't accept that. I don't give into that every single time. But are we willing to? Are we willing to take this Lenten journey and to go down that road? So there is the story of the call of Abraham and Sarah. Again, I tell you, get the book. There's a lot more in this chapter than just the call of Abraham and Sarah. So thanks for joining me. I'll see you next week for lesson number 3.